The gunshot echoed across the empty plains of Wyoming Territory, 1878. As Abigail Hayes flinched and dropped to the ground, her heart pounding in her chest as she sheltered behind the overturned wagon. Another bullet splintered the wood just inches from her face, sending fragments flying past her cheek. 3 dead, including her father, and the bandits were still circling, waiting to claim whatever meager possessions they could salvage from the wreckage of the small wagon train. "Miss, stay down." The voice came from somewhere behind her, deep and commanding. Abigail pressed herself harder against the wagon, the taste of dust and fear bitter in her mouth. She'd left Philadelphia with such hope, traveling west with her father to start a new life after her mother's passing. Now, at 22, she was alone, stranded in the wilderness with strangers dead around her. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, then more gunshots rang out. She heard cursing, shouting, the thunder of retreating horses, then silence. "They're gone." The same voice closer now, "You can come out." Slowly, Abigail raised her head. A tall man stood before her, a Winchester rifle in his hands, the brim of his worn Stetson pulled low over his eyes. His clothes were dusty, but his stance was steady, confident. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Name's Cole Zachary," he said, extending a hand to help her up. "Was passing by when I heard the shots." "Abigail Hayes," she replied, taking his offered hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm against her trembling fingers. "My father, he's—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Cole's expression softened. "I'm sorry, Miss Hayes. We should bury them proper, then figure out what to do with you." As Abigail stood beside the 3 fresh graves, the weight of her situation crashed down upon her. She was hundreds of miles from anyone she knew, with nothing but the clothes she wore and a small bundle of personal items. The nearest town, according to Cole, was Pine Ridge, about 2 days' ride away. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice small against the vast emptiness of the plains. Cole looked at her, his blue eyes thoughtful beneath the brim of his hat. "I've got a small ranch about half a day's ride from here. You can stay there while you decide your next move." "It ain't much, but it's shelter." Abigail hesitated. Going with a stranger seemed dangerous, but staying alone in the wilderness was certain death. Thank you. I don't have much to pay you with, don't need payment," he interrupted. "Just doing what any decent man would do." They rode double on Cole's horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding. Abigail sat behind him, awkwardly holding onto his waist, the proximity to this stranger both comforting and unsettling. As they rode, he told her about his ranch, a small operation with a modest herd of cattle, a vegetable garden, and a cabin he'd built with his own hands. "Been out here 5 years now," he said over his shoulder. "Came west after the war, needed space to breathe." "The war?" she asked. "Fought for the Union, saw things no man should see." His voice grew quiet. "Out here it's just me and the land, suits me fine." By the time they reached his ranch, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The cabin was small but sturdy, nestled against a copse of pine trees with a creek running nearby. A small barn stood to one side, and beyond that, Abigail could see cattle grazing in the distance. "It's lovely," she said honestly. Cole's mouth quirked up slightly, the closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him. "It serves its purpose." That night, Cole insisted Abigail take his bed while he slept on a bedroll near the fire. She protested, but he wouldn't hear of it. "My ma raised me better than to let a lady sleep on the floor," he said firmly, lying in his bed surrounded by the unfamiliar scents of leather, pine, and something distinctly masculine. Abigail stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. What would become of her now? She had no skills for frontier life, no money to return east, and no family left to turn to. In the morning, Cole was already up, cooking breakfast when she emerged from the small bedroom. "Sleep all right?" he asked, flipping cornbread in a cast-iron skillet. "Yes, thank you." It wasn't entirely true. She'd tossed and turned, plagued by images of her father falling, blood blooming on his chest. Over breakfast, they discussed her options. There's a stagecoach that comes through Pine Ridge every 2 weeks, Cole said. Could take you to Cheyenne, and from there you could head east if you've got folks back there. Abigail shook her head. There's no one. My mother passed last year. Father was all I had left. Cole was quiet for a moment. What were you planning to do out here? Father bought land near Laramie. We were going to start a small farm. She swallowed hard. I don't know where the deed is now. It was in his satchel. Bandits probably took it, Cole said grimly. Not that it matters much without him. Abigail nodded, fighting back tears. Look, Cole said, his voice softening, you can stay here until you figure things out. I've got a spare room I use for storage. We can clear it out, make it proper for you. I couldn't impose, it's no imposition. Winter's coming in a few months. Nobody should be traveling too far once the snow starts. You can help around the ranch, earn your keep if it makes you feel better. Abigail considered his offer. The thought of traveling alone to a strange town with no money and no prospects was terrifying. At least here she had shelter and safety. Thank you, Mr. Zachary, I accept, at least until I can determine a more permanent solution. Cole nodded once. Cole, Mr. Zachary was my pa. The days fell into a rhythm. Cole taught Abigail the basics of ranch life, how to milk the cow, tend the vegetable garden, make soap from lye and fat. She learned to cook on the wood stove, to mend clothes, to recognize the tracks of animals that might threaten the livestock. Cole was patient but reserved, a man of few words who spent long days working the land and tending his small herd. Sometimes in the evenings, he'd whittle by the fire while Abigail read aloud from one of the few books he owned, mostly practical manuals, but also a worn copy of the Odyssey that had belonged to his grandfather. As August turned to September, Abigail realized she was no longer counting the days until she might leave. The ranch was becoming home, and Cole, with his quiet strength and unexpected kindnesses, was becoming someone she looked forward to seeing each day. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Cole broke their comfortable silence. Winter comes early up here, he said, his eyes on the distant mountains. First snow usually falls by late October. We should start preparing. Abigail asked softly. Cole turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. Unless you've decided to leave. I haven't, she admitted. I like it here. Something shifted in his gaze. I'm glad to hear that, Abigail. It was the first time he'd used her given name instead of Miss Hayes, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. The next day, they rode into Pine Ridge for supplies. It was Abigail's first trip to town since her arrival at the ranch, and she felt strangely nervous. Her dress, though carefully mended, was worn and faded, her bonnet simple compared to the fashions she'd once worn in Philadelphia. Pine Ridge was little more than a wide spot in the road, a general store, a saloon, a small church, and a handful of buildings clustered along a dusty main street. As they tied their horses outside the general store, Abigail noticed the curious glances cast their way. Inside, the proprietor, a portly man with mutton chops, greeted Cole warmly. Zachary, twice in one summer, must be a special occasion. His eyes slid to Abigail with undisguised interest. Just stocking up for winter, Davis, Cole replied. This is Miss Hayes. She's staying at my place for a while. Davis's eyebrows shot up. Is that so? Well, welcome to Pine Ridge, Miss Hayes. As they gathered supplies, flour, sugar, coffee, ammunition, lamp oil, and various other necessities, Abigail felt the weight of speculation from the few other customers in the store. A woman staying unchaperoned with a bachelor was scandalous, even on the frontier. Outside the store, while Cole loaded their purchases, a woman approached Abigail. She was middle-aged with kind eyes and a practical dress. Excuse me, Miss Hayes, I'm Martha Wilson, the preacher's wife. She lowered her voice. I couldn't help but overhear. Are you truly staying at Mr. Zachary's ranch? Abigail straightened her spine. Yes, I am. Mr. Zachary has been kind enough to offer me shelter after my father was killed by bandits. Mrs. Wilson's face softened with sympathy. "I'm terribly sorry for your loss. But my dear, you must understand how this appears. A young woman alone with a man, it's not proper." "I assure you, Mrs. Wilson, Mr. Zachary has been nothing but a gentleman," Abigail replied, though she felt her cheeks flush. "I'm sure he has. Cole Zachary is a good man, if a bit solitary." "But reputations are fragile things." She hesitated. "You could stay with us in town if you prefer." Before Abigail could respond, Cole appeared at her side. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Mrs. Wilson was just introducing herself," Abigail explained. The preacher's wife smiled tightly. "Indeed. I was also extending an invitation for Miss Hayes to stay with us in town should she wish for more appropriate accommodations." Cole's jaw tightened, but he nodded politely. "That's mighty generous of you, madam. Abigail is welcome to make whatever choice suits her best." The use of her first name did not go unnoticed by Mrs. Wilson, whose eyebrows rose slightly. On the ride back to the ranch, an uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Finally, Cole spoke. "If you want to stay in town, I'd understand. Mrs. Wilson's right about how things look." Abigail considered his words carefully. "Does it bother you, what people think?" Cole was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. "Used to be I didn't care much what folks thought. But I don't want them thinking ill of you." His concern touched her deeply. "I'm not ashamed to be staying at your ranch, Cole. You've been nothing but honorable." They rode a little further before he spoke again. "There's another option if you're willing to consider it." "What's that?" Cole kept his eyes fixed on the trail ahead. "We could marry before the snow falls." Abigail's heart skipped a beat. "Marry? It would be a practical arrangement," he said quickly. "Give you protection under my name, a secure place to live. I wouldn't expect anything you weren't willing to give." Abigail fell silent, her mind whirling with the unexpected proposal. Marriage to Cole wasn't something she'd considered, yet as she thought about it now, the idea didn't seem as strange as it should have. "I would need time to think," she finally said. Cole nodded. "Of course, there's no rush, just something to consider." That night, Abigail lay awake in her small room, contemplating Cole's proposal. It was practical, as he'd said, a marriage of convenience to silence gossip and provide her with security. But was that all it was to him? And was that all she wanted over the past weeks? She'd grown to admire Cole, his quiet strength, his fairness, the gentle way he had with animals, the respect he showed her. He was handsome too, in a weathered, solid way, with those startling blue eyes that sometimes seemed to see right through her. By morning, she'd made her decision. Cole was chopping wood when she approached him, the rhythmic swing of the axe pausing as he noticed her. "I've been thinking about your proposal," she said without preamble. He set the axe down, giving her his full attention. "I'll marry you," she continued, "but I'd like to be clear about what this means. I'm not looking for charity or just protection. I want a real partnership. I may not know much about ranch life yet, but I'm learning and I'll work hard. I'll be a good wife to you, Cole Zachary, if you'll be a good husband to me." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or respect. He took a step toward her. "I wouldn't have asked if I didn't think we could build something worthwhile together," he said. "You're a strong woman, Abigail Hayes, stronger than you know." "Is that a yes to my terms?" she asked, her heart beating faster, the corner of his mouth quirked up. "It is." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Pine Ridge, with Reverend Wilson officiating and a handful of townspeople as witnesses. Cole had ridden to town the day before to arrange everything, returning with a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother and a length of blue calico fabric for Abigail to make a new dress. The ceremony was brief, but meaningful. When Cole slipped the ring onto her finger and repeated the words "to love and to cherish," his voice was steady, his eyes never leaving hers. And when he leaned down to place a gentle kiss on her lips, their first Abigail felt a flutter of something that went beyond practicality. As they rode back to the ranch, their ranch now, Cole reached over to take her hand. "Mrs. Zachary," he said, testing the name. Abigail smiled. It has a nice sound to it. That night, they faced the awkwardness of their new situation. There was only one proper bed in the cabin, and though Cole offered to continue sleeping on his bedroll, Abigail refused. "We're married now," she said, summoning her courage. "The bed is large enough for both of us." They lay side by side that night, a careful distance between them, both acutely aware of the other's presence. Cole had been true to his word about expecting nothing, but as Abigail listened to his steady breathing in the darkness, she wondered what it would be like to bridge that gap. The first snow came earlier than expected, in mid-October, a light dusting that melted by noon but served as a warning of what was to come. Cole worked from sunrise to sunset in the following days, chopping extra firewood, reinforcing the barn, bringing the cattle closer to the homestead for easier feeding during the worst of the weather. Abigail matched his industry, canning the last of the garden's produce, drying herbs, rendering fat for candles, and preparing the cabin for the long winter ahead. They worked well together, developing a rhythm that required few words but accomplished much. 2 weeks after their wedding, a proper blizzard hit. The snow fell thick and fast, driven by howling winds that found every crack in the cabin's walls. By morning, drifts had piled against the door, and the world outside was transformed into a white wilderness. "We're lucky," Cole said as they sat by the fire that evening. "Got all the preparations done in time." Abigail nodded, watching the flames dance. "How long will it last? The snow, I mean." "Could be a few days, could be months with only brief thaws between storms. That's why we stock up so much." He glanced at her. "Are you afraid?" "Not afraid, exactly. Just, it's so isolated. In Philadelphia, there were always people around, even in winter." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Does it bother you, being alone with me?" Abigail looked at him then, really looked at him, his strong profile illuminated by firelight, the hands that were capable of such strength yet such gentleness. "No," she said softly. "It doesn't bother me at all." Something shifted between them that night. As they lay in bed, the gap between them seemed smaller, the air charged with unspoken possibilities. The next morning, Cole touched her for the first time beyond the necessary, or accidental, a gentle brush of his fingers against her cheek as she passed him coffee. The contact was brief but intentional, and it left her skin tingling. Days blended into weeks as October gave way to November. The snow continued to fall intermittently, trapping them in their small world. They established routines, Cole venturing out to tend the animals and check their surroundings, Abigail maintaining the cabin and preparing meals. In the evenings, they would raid, play checkers, or simply talk by the fire. Gradually, Abigail learned more about the man she had married. He told her about growing up in Ohio, about joining the Union Army at 18, about the horrors he'd witnessed at Antietam and Gettysburg. He spoke of his journey west after the war, seeking peace and solitude, and how he'd worked cattle drives and as a ranch hand before saving enough to buy his own small spread. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood in Philadelphia, her education at a ladies' seminary, her mother's long illness. She told him about her father's decision to go west after her mother's death, seeking a fresh start for both of them. "Do you regret coming west?" Cole asked one evening as they sat side by side on the bench he'd carved, watching the snow fall beyond the window. Abigail considered the question. "I regret losing my father. I regret that he'll never see the life he dreamed of building." She turned to look at Cole. "But I don't regret ending up here, with you." His eyes darkened, and slowly, giving her time to pull away, he leaned toward her. The kiss was tender, questioning, and when she responded, his hand came up to cradle her face. That night their marriage became true in every sense of the word. Cole was gentle, patient, his calloused hands surprisingly soft as they explored her body. Abigail discovered feelings and sensations she had never imagined, and in the aftermath, lying in his arms with their bodies intertwined, she felt a sense of rightness, of having found her place in the world. "I never expected you," Cole whispered into her hair. Never thought I'd want someone in my life again. Are you glad I'm here? She asked, suddenly vulnerable. He tightened his arms around her. More than I have words to say. As November deepened, they settled into a closer intimacy, learning each other's bodies as thoroughly as they had learned each other's minds. The practical arrangement they had agreed to blossomed into something neither had anticipated: a deep, abiding love built on mutual respect, shared work, and growing passion. The winter stretched before them, long months of isolation and challenges. They faced frozen pipes, a sick cow that required night-long vigils, and a week when the temperature dropped so low that frost formed on the inside of the windows despite the constant fire. Through it all, they worked as partners, drawing strength from each other. On Christmas Eve, Cole surprised Abigail with a small carved wooden box polished to a soft glow. "It's not much," he said, almost shyly. Inside was a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a rose, simple but beautiful. "Cole, it's lovely. Where did you get it?" "Bought it in Pine Ridge before the snow, had Davis keep it for me until I could pick it up on my last supply run." He hesitated. "My mother always said a woman should have something pretty, even on the frontier." Abigail touched the brooch reverently, then pinned it to her dress. "Thank you. I have something for you too, though it's not ready yet." She had been secretly knitting him a scarf in the evenings when he was outside doing final checks on the animals, using yarn she'd found in a trunk in the storage room. They celebrated Christmas simply but meaningfully, with a special meal, Bible readings, and songs Abigail remembered from her childhood. As they sat by the fire that night, Cole's arm around her shoulders, Abigail realized how far she had come from the frightened young woman who had crouched behind an overturned wagon just months before. January brought the harshest, weather yet a week-long blizzard that left them truly isolated, with snow piled higher than the windows. They conserved firewood carefully, sometimes sharing body heat under blankets during the day to avoid burning too much fuel. "Tell me about spring here," Abigail asked one particularly cold night as they huddled together in bed. "What's it like?" Cole's voice was warm in the darkness. "It comes sudden-like. One day there's snow everywhere, then the Chinook winds blow in from the mountains, warm and fierce. The snow melts so fast it creates streams where there weren't any before. The grass turns green almost overnight, and wildflowers appear in meadows that were white just days earlier. It sounds beautiful." "It is. Most beautiful place on earth, I reckon." His hand found hers beneath the covers. "Be even more beautiful this year, seeing it with you." February brought brief thaws, tantalizing glimpses of what spring might bring, but March returned with vengeful storms that kept them housebound once more. It was during one of these storms that Abigail realized something had changed. She had been feeling unusually tired, with occasional bouts of nausea in the mornings. At first, she attributed it to cabin fever or perhaps some slight food spoilage, but as the symptoms persisted, a different explanation began to form in her mind. One evening, as Cole mended a harness by the fire, she gathered her courage. "Cole," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves, "I believe I might be with child." His hands stilled on the leather. Slowly, he raised his eyes to meet hers, an expression of wonder spreading across his face. "A baby, you're sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor to confirm it. My monthly hasn't come for 2 months now, and there are other signs." Cole set aside the harness and crossed to where she sat, kneeling before her and taking her hands in his. "A child," he repeated, his voice filled with awe. "Our child." Abigail had worried how he might react. They had never discussed children, had never planned for this possibility in their hastily arranged marriage, but the joy in his eyes erased her concerns. "Are you pleased?" she asked. In answer, he kissed her, pouring all his emotions into the gesture. When they broke apart, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "More than pleased," he said hoarsely. "I never thought I'd have a family of my own. After the war, I figured I'd live and die alone out here." He placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "Now I'll have both you and our child." The knowledge of the growing life inside her changed something fundamental in their relationship. Cole became even more protective, insisting Abigail rest more and taking on additional chores despite her protests. They began to plan for the baby's arrival, expected sometime in late summer, discussing changes they would need to make to the cabin and wondering whether they would have a son or daughter. As March gave way to April, the weather began to shift. The storms became less frequent, the thaws more lasting. One morning, Abigail woke to the sound of water dripping from the eaves, a steady, persistent rhythm that spoke of winter's retreat. "Listen," she said to Cole as he stirred beside her. "Spring is coming," he smiled, drawing her closer. "Just as I promised." The days grew longer, the sun stronger. Patches of ground began to appear as the snow receded, revealing dormant grass waiting to green. Cole ventured farther from the cabin now, checking on the range, repairing fences damaged by winter's assault. In late April, the Chinook winds Cole had described arrived, warm and persistent, accelerating the melt. Streams formed everywhere, the sound of running water a constant background to their days. The world seemed to awaken from its long sleep. Birds returned, early wildflowers pushed through the softening earth, and the cattle grew more lively. On the first truly warm day of May, Cole took Abigail's hand. "Come with me. There's something I want to show you." He led her to a small rise not far from the cabin, where the snow had completely melted, revealing a carpet of tiny blue flowers. "First bloom of spring," he said. "My mother called them sky eyes." Abigail knelt carefully, mindful of her slightly swelling belly, to touch the delicate petals. "They're beautiful. I come here every spring," Cole admitted. "Sort of marks the end of winter for me." Abigail looked up at him, this strong, quiet man who had saved her life and then given her a new one. "Thank you for sharing this with me." He helped her to her feet and then, unexpectedly, pulled her into a dance, humming a tune she didn't recognize. They moved together on the small patch of dry ground, surrounded by melting snow and tiny flowers, the sun warm on their faces. "What's this for?" she asked, laughing as he twirled her gently. "Celebrating," he said simply. "Spring, you, our child, life." As they danced, Abigail thought about the journey that had brought her here, the tragedy that had taken her father, the chance encounter with a solitary cowboy, the marriage hastily arranged before winter's arrival, and the love that had grown during those snow-bound months. "I love you, Cole Zachary," she said, the words coming easily now, though there had been a time she had wondered if she would ever speak them. He stopped dancing, his eyes serious as they met hers. "And I love you, Abigail Zachary, more than I ever thought possible." The world around them was reawakening, renewing itself after winter's long siege. Their lives, too, were in a season of rebirth, the new life growing inside her, the love that had blossomed between them, the future they would build together on this land. As spring firmly took hold of the Wyoming wilderness, the ranch came alive with activity. Cole and Abigail worked side by side, planting the garden with seeds they had carefully preserved, repairing winter damage to the buildings, and preparing for the busy months ahead. Abigail's belly grew rounder, and Cole would often place his hand there in the evenings, marveling at the occasional flutter of movement. Their first spring together marked not just nature's renewal, but the beginning of their life as a true family. The hasty marriage that had begun as a practical arrangement had transformed into a deep and abiding love, as strong and enduring as the mountains that surrounded their small ranch. They had married before the snow fell, weathered the winter together, and now, as spring bloomed around them, they looked forward to all the seasons that would follow together.